All right. Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to this Zoom presentation with the Northern California Underwater Photographic Society. So good to be with all of you. If you're watching on the replay, thanks for being there. And then to the folks that are here right now, thanks for being there and for tuning in. Thanks to the Society for welcoming me back. It's been a few years, and I recall being in Santa Rosa or somewhere in the Bay Area, seeing you guys at some point back in the day. So it's great to be able to be back here many years since on my photographic journey, and now working as an expedition photographer and nature guide with the Lindblad Expeditions National Geographic fleet of vessels. And on board those vessels, I get to be part of a dive team in the places that I go in the very cold waters. We don't take any of the guests with us, and so our job is to go and document what's under the water, see what stories we can weave in a presentation that's usually delivered the same day as the dive. So it's sort of like a mini shootout every day. If you have not been to the Monterey Shootout, this year is your year because I won't be there. I'll be on a ship, so go ahead and sign up there. You'll get the you'll win the video category, or at least get an honorable mention. Um, Without me in the lineup. He said very humbly. No, I've enjoyed being at the shootout every year. My goal is to always make a little video that can get presented, and having the deadline of the time to shoot and edit and put it all together and get it out there is one way to make sure that stuff actually gets off of my hard drives and into the world. And so I really appreciate the shootout. And so with my job with Lindblad, the job is to go dive, take photos and videos, and then the same day, sometimes you get 2 hours to throw everything together and show people what was there while they were hiking or kayaking or while we were cruising. So I like that ability to provide a 360 experience of, yes, you saw the wilderness out here, but here's what's actually going on in this water world under the keel. So today, I was asked to share, and I do apologize. I'm very tired because I was up on a call for a film production. There's a Disney Hollywood big time production being filmed over at Monastery Beach right now here in Monterey, based off of the book Whale Fall. So if you have not read Whale Fall, the book, there's a mention of Monastery Beach as a main part of it, the Monterey community of divers kind of being wrapped up into the story. So I've been part of the production design, everything, trying to make sure that things go well for them, and that we look the part that the divers are actually looking like divers, and the props people worked on Jaws and a few other things, so the props look awesome. There's a few tanks that are plastic that I swear if you were to bring that tank to any local dive shop, someone would try to fill it because it looks so real. So there's a movie being filmed over there. If you were trying to dive this weekend and couldn't, or the last couple of days over there and it was shut down, that's what was going on. And yeah, so I was in the water about 6 hours today, towing the talent back and forth between different blades of kelp and this, that, and the other. And so rushed home to be here with you all. So I was tasked with showing you a little bit of my photography from Antarctica and then my recent trips to Baja California aboard the Western Flyer and the Lindblad ships. The Western Flyer being the historic John Steinbeck Ed Ricketts vessel that has been renovated and is now coming back from the Gulf of California. It was its first time sailing back into the Gulf in 85 years since the log from the Sea of Cortez was written back in, or the original trip happened in 1940. So I got to be on board that, brought my camera, got to take some photos. And we're going to share a little bit of behind the scenes, maybe some photo editing or some photo techniques or various little things that can help up your story game in your photography if you are looking for some tips and tricks, or you can just see a little bit of how I do it, because everybody has their own way of storytelling. The joke is never the same depending on who the presenter is. So it depends on cadence, your interest, your time underwater, what you feel drawn to. So yeah, we're just going to go through maybe some of those tips and tricks. So I try to have puns and everything. So this is the under story. and I'll come back into my presentation. The understory, and this is going to be secrets of the pixel pushers. So I'll let you appreciate the majesty of the pun right there. And then this is, boom, let you know that this is live in real time for all of you. I believe that is the correct date there on the slide. Beautiful. Okay, so this photo here was taken over on Monastery Beach, my favorite place to dive. And this is a photo that the production design for this movie is using to help model what they're going to have in CGI and in their tanks and stuff for the rest of the film shoot. My favorite place, the Kelp Cathedral. And this is all ambient light with a little bit of fill strobe on the lower left there, but tried to make it as just being in the cathedral as possible. And I learned my craft of underwater photography in kelp forests. And so my style of photography involves a lot of slow shutter speeds to bring in a lot of light because it's very dark in a kelp forest. It can be very similar to being indoors because of the canopy covering up the surface. And so that sunball is not made in the same way that you would make it if you were in the tropics with a fast shutter speed, a small aperture, trying to get that little pinhole light to create the starburst pattern from the sun. This, I'm letting the kelp and the little gaps between the kelp blades create the sunburst effect. And so this was I think, 1/8 of a second or 1/13 of a second exposure. I will sometimes do 4-second exposures like this photo behind me with rear curtain sync. And so this was just me trying to stay as stable as possible for 4 seconds. And then with a flash pop at the end, kelp being a photosynthetic organism, it absorbs light very well and captures light very well. So it's fun to paint with that light and try to make all of that happen. Um,
So, Pat, is this all from just one exposure?
this right here.
Yeah, no, sorry, the one that you're sharing on your screen that has the kelp forest. Because, I mean, I'm just
Yes.
amazed at the dynamic range between the sunball and what obviously was that white sponge that obviously was in a very dark place.
Yeah, this is one exposure, and then yeah, I had some fill strobe on the left side to try
But
to
you
get.
were able to pull all that dynamic range out of a single raw exposure.
Yeah, yeah, and that's just by being as stable as possible and then doing as slow of a shutter speed as I was able to get away with without having any motion of the fish.
And then you didn't have problems with overexposure of the sunball.
No, and so my underwater photography relies very heavily on post-processing. And
Yeah,
so I will often overexpose or underexpose in certain situations because I know that I can pull the detail back in
yeah,
post.
yeah,
Um, I am rarely a in camera perfect exposure
yeah.
photographer. I tend to let the spirit guide me, which then becomes very frustrating when I'm trying to edit a photo. And if I had just tried a little bit harder, been more patient, I might have saved myself several hours of fixing the backscatter or sometimes I'll have photos that looked really good in my mind and on the little LCD screen and it's out of focus or other little details because I'm trying to get a little bit too crazy with what I'm doing. But in this particular case, this is a photo that I've taken a lot of the very ambient light, slow shutter speed, and a little bit of fill pop on the side, but not like a
Were you
massive.
able to pull to get all the detail right with a global correction, or did you need to do local regional corrections to the darkest and brightest areas to be able to get everything to where nothing's overexposed and nothing's underexposed?
In this particular photo, most of it was global, but I'm almost always going to have a local
Hmm.
brush or gradiated filter on the highlights and on my subject to bring
Okay.
that out and see how far the detail is.
Okay.
There is dodging and burning, except when we're in a competition where that's not allowed.
Yeah.
But for my own Instagram or for my own photos, I'll use all the data that's available to me, but no more. I don't add
Yeah.
stuff or do double compositions or Photoshop. this, that, or the other, unless that's exactly what I want to do, and then I tell people that that's what I'm doing.
Okay. Well, this is a very impressive photo, so thank you for sharing some
Oh,
details of
thanks. Yeah.
how you
Well,
made it
I
like
I
that.
upgraded to a camera that had better dynamic range recently.
Yeah.
These were the types of images that I was hoping to get out of them. I'm gonna move on real
Okay.
quick just to show you
Thank you.
some. Yeah, thank you. Uh, so here's a Kelpie, a selfie with some kelp that I took the other day, and this was just playing around with faster shutter speed and a single strobe lighting up my face and the kelp blade. So the difference between slow shutter, faster shutter, to be able to get the black background. And then this is a zoom blur. So there was a little bit of surge motion, but I did a 1/13th length exposure. And while I'm pulling the trigger to take the photo, I'm also mid zoom through a zoom lens that I have. And so then the flash pop at the end. So the zoom in effect is from me zooming, not from surge. But you could do a similar effect with Surge if you felt confident that you could like manage it. But it took me a little bit, felt like playing a video game, and then I was like, oh, cool, that kind of worked. And the reason I wanted to do that was to pull a little bit of focus on the bull kelp, the young bull kelp that's growing. And I did probably 10 or 15 of these until the surf perch came in and happened to be perfect and in the spot and having that little pop of fish in the photo kind of made it to me. I have maybe 5 or 6 other images in this series that would have worked just as well, but having the fish in there is what ended up selling it to me. So just this kind of ultimately, if you remember nothing else from the presentation, the photographic portion, what I've learned the most working with the Lindblad National Geographic people now on the ships um,
Hmm. Oh, okay.
with the photographers that are
You're not going
there.
to give me 10 minutes, are you?
Not right now. This is life.
Oh,
Yeah, we're live. All good. Um, so the what I've learned a lot from the National Geographic photographer, people that I interact with now on the ships, so people who have at least gone through the National Geographic process. There are many photographers on the ships that are guests, that are guides, that are not in that Nat Geo expert realm, but interacting with all of those people and then having these presentations over and over. I am self-taught in underwater photography. I've seen photos that I like that I try to recreate, or then I take photos that I like, or I play around in Lightroom. So actually having a time to see more professional people that have topside photographers basically who have all this time to prep their angle, prep their composition, plan everything out. So much of underwater photography for me is very unplanned because I just like to go with the camera that I have set up, my macro lens, my wet lenses, my fisheye lens, my snoot light or whatever, and then just let that guide me. Basically, my camera becomes the interpretation of the landscape, but learning more from people who actually take the time to plan out their photos in air where you don't have just like an hour to come up with something. Um, there's a lot of different premises that I guess like make the most sense to me in the photography. And so if you get nothing else out of this presentation at the end, we're talking about light composition and moment. And so I've already shown you some examples of that, of the light in the kelp forest, for example, bringing in that ambient light to me is everything. Composition with that like selfie of kelp of having the scimitar blade and me be like center for the selfie. And then this moment is a good example of like there's interesting light to me from the flash pop and the blue coloration of the water. The composition, there's sort of that head of bull kelp at the third, and then there's this moment where this fish comes by, and then light composition moment, those three things coming together, then you have a satisfying photo. Sometimes a photo is one, two of those, three of them. One that you don't particularly care for. You can change composition through cropping. You can change the light in post, but really the moment ultimately ends up being the thing that you can't account for in your preparation. You just hope you're ready, you have the right settings or vision or adaptability or post-processing time. So moment tends to be the thing that wins contests if you're into contest photography. But you can also make a moment out of a lot of photos, even with nothing going on by thinking of light composition. Uh, and so this would be an example. This next one, here's a rockfish just sitting there. doing nothing. And so then you slow down the shutter speed and had my focus light on. And then with a slight little movement of the camera, now you have this tree fish going through hyperspace. And it's cropped in a little bit because I needed a little bit wider to be able to move the camera through. But you can create a moment out of nothing by having a little bit of composition. And then something you probably already know if you read Alex Mustard's books or anything, but if you tend to have a macro photo or portrait or something where there's not really a lot of context for the eye to figure out where or what you're looking at. If you put your subject at a diagonal, slight diagonal, it's just like instantaneously more satisfying to the eye because it gives you a line to follow. A lot of photos that are very interesting or that people like are photos where your eye can wander and look around and see a lot of stuff. Like if you're in an art gallery, sometimes the art isn't very obvious, but your eye is captured by it because you keep following it and looking around. So sometimes there's compositions and photos that are just there, perfect, boom, obvious, makes sense. A sea lion looking into camera, oh my God, incredible. But then there's other photos where just having your eyes being able to wander is what's really fun. So here's a photo that I liked of a tentacle on an anemone that happened to be really curled up on the sand. It just caught my eye that it was all curly twirly, and so took this photo a little bit ago over at the breakwater before it shut down from the sea lions. And then remembering that you can do some fun stuff with shallow depth of field, with desaturation. This was a photo that I thought was kind of a throwaway that a lot of people ended up really enjoying when I showed it to them of this sand dollar field at the breakwater. I don't know how many times you all have swam over this or seen it. Sand dollar fields can be an interesting or not that interesting place. And then that day I was like, oh, I have my fisheye lens. Let's, that curvature of the sand dollar is matching with the fisheye. Ended up being really satisfying. And then this is a very, 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 very heavily edited photo coming up. As far as the light toning, I haven't changed anything about the composition, but I have worked really hard to knock out the background without using Photoshop, just with the tonal curve. But you could use masks or go into Photoshop and paint it out or cut this out or whatever. But this was using the color that was in the image. I really thought that I could find a portrait in it of this bit of bull kelp. So to me, it kind of looked like a Vogue magazine cover, something or other. Or I guess if it was under the waves, it would be vague instead of Vogue, and that's a French pun because vague means wave. But so
That is
portrait of,
amazing.
oh, thank you. So this is like I knew that I liked the way that the bull kelp looked, but I didn't really know how to make this interesting. I've taken so many bull kelp photos over the years. And so sometimes it's like, okay, let's see what we've got in the sliders in Lightroom. And okay, let's see what we got if we paint this or darken this. And so um, I like to personify kelp whenever I can. And so there's that kelp there. Okay, so that's local stuff. That's recent stuff. Let's go over to the Gulf of California real quick, where I recently was for a month working with Lindblad National Geographic Expeditions, exploring the Midriff Islands, and then also aboard the Western Flyer. If you haven't ever been to the Gulf of California, there are liveaboards that you can take out of Los Cabos and that you can take out of um, somewhere on the Sonora side. And there's a few dive shops, I think in Arizona or Southern California, that run dive trips to some liveaboards that are down there. So you can dive the Midriff Islands. There's also a lot of diving, obviously, off of Loreto, off of Cabo Pulmo, Los Cabos, San Jose del Cabo, being Los Cabos, and then Cabo San Lucas. Not a ton of diving on the Pacific side, very remote, not a lot of people there, but also fun diving. I've been there with National Geographic Lindblad Expeditions. This is an island called Isla San Martin. And if you're wondering what it looks like at that particular island, it is a Mexican Channel Islands. So this is what it looks like down there. There's a continuation of the biome of what you have in the Channel Islands. There's a wounded wrasse or a rock wrasse, Garibaldi, half moons. You're in the Channel Islands right there off of Mexico. Obviously, it makes sense. The there's no international boundary to the ocean out there. So the further down you go, you start to lose the kelp entirely and transform into a more coral reef environment. And that really starts in earnest in Cabo Pulmo, where the oldest coral reef on this side of the world is. Um, and it's on the eastern side. The log from the Sea of Cortez, they go and they visit it. So once you get down to Cabo Pulmo, which is just, I think, about 500 or 600 miles from Isla San Martin, you have tropical fish, tropical environment. It's coral dominant, it's not kelp dominant anymore. So in there you have snappers, you have kingfish, you have some squirrel fish, uh, these little gorgonians and corals and so on. And so by that point, it's transitioned into being much more of a tropical environment. And this will basically be the fish assemblage that you find all the way down to Panama. But then what's interesting in the Gulf side is that you have cold water that comes in from upwelling, and then you also have um, this tropical influence. And so up into the Sea of Cortez, 200 miles as the crow flies over the peninsula, but over 1,000 miles swimming, you get this type of environment in Bahia de Los Angeles, where you have seaweeds like kelps that you might find on the opposite side in the Pacific, California sheephead, which are found all the way here to Monterey, and then soft corals and other organisms that are supposed to be found all the way down to the tropics. So the Gulf side is a very interesting place because you have sheephead and soft coral that basically you might see in the Channel Islands, but it's so far away that this environment is being created, like transmuted from the Channel Islands across the peninsula after going through a tropical zone. And the way that this happens is that these fish and cold water species will just go deeper in the tropical zone and live down in deeper water, and then they make their way up to the surface in the northern Gulf. So basically, you can copy and paste the Channel Islands into the Gulf of California by having cold water refugia, where the animals just sink deeper into and they stay cold and then they re-emerge where it's colder near the surface um, once you make your way into the Sea of Cortez. So that's how you can have a nearly identical environment 1,000 miles away uh, with a completely different biome in between if you're in scuba diving depths. So it's pretty cool to be able to dive in the Midriff Islands and be like, I'm in a bizarro through the looking glass Channel Islands because I'm so far away from there, but also not through these cold water emergence areas. There's a little map that I made. You can kind of see maybe on the outside, it's like the dark blue green water into tropical water, and then that weird green like yellowish green water up in the north, and that in the northern Gulf, and that is from tidal upwelling, wind upwelling, mixing because of the Venturi effect or the channeling effect of the islands up there. So very unique habitat. Highly recommend. And it's cold. It's like 56 degrees we had up there diving. So if you enjoy diving around here, then you'll be totally comfortable there. And then just so you know, in Bahia Magdalena, this is where the kelp and the tropical fish meet. So you can dive with the fish that you find in Cabo Pulmo with the kelp forest that you end up finding further north. These are barber fish, Cortez angelfish, Panamic Sergeant Major, all hanging out under a bed of egregia, southern sea palm kelp that you can find diving at Point Lobos. This will be the understory algae that dominates. So you find that stuff all the way up to here, all the way down to Bahia Magdalena, pretty much wraps up, and then you have tropical stuff dominating after that. And the gray whales are in Bahia Magdalena. So these gray whales know tropical fish and kelps, and then they make their way all the way up into the Arctic to go experience a different environment. These gray whales are the same ones that swim by here. So just so we are connected to Baja, to Mexico, to the Sea of Cortez in very real and direct ways, not only from the whales that swim by, but from the biomes that overlap and intertwine through there. So
And Patrick,
that's a whale that came over to our Ponga. And if you've never touched a whale, these whales kind of come right up and beg you to touch them almost. And the way that a whale feels, this particular whale felt like a rubber boot, just so you know. That's what they feel like. They also have a bunch of lice and stuff on them, but if you're ever like, I want to touch a whale, but I haven't touched a whale in a long time, just like get a rubber boot wet and touch it and make it a little squishy. And there you go. All right.
And can you guys
Then
get
going up into the Gulf of California, Bahia Concepcion is an interesting little spot. It's a bit of a backwater, not a ton of water flow, and so you get really interesting critters. The Gulf of California is filled with endemic life that only lives there in the Gulf, and that would be things like the brown cheek blenny. This is a very fun fish, very similar to the yellowfin fringe heads that we have out here in Monterey that win every year in the macro category at the Monterey Shootout. If you take a photo of a yellowfin fringe head to win the photo category at the shootout, you're pandering and you should be ashamed of yourself. With that said, I did that in 2016, and that propelled me to a victory there. So do what you have to do, but just know that it'll eat away at your soul if you do that. But anyway, this is a brown cheek blenny, endemic to the Gulf of California. Here is another brown cheek blenny uh, doing a little yawn for me. So good example of a moment uh, with this fish. And leaving the brown cheek blenny, going up into the midriff island zone, an amazing place, strong currents, cold water, tropical and temperate organisms mixing in the middle of a beautiful desert. This area is called the Galapagos of the Gulf. It's called that because there are incredible bird islands there, like San Pedro Martir, Isla Raza, some of the largest breeding colonies of blue-footed boobies and brown-footed boobies, or they're called cocos boobies now, the particular ones we have here, can be found there. So if you go to the Galapagos and you're like, oh my God, look at all these boobies, look at all these birds. Some of the most important nesting islands in the world for certain seabirds that we see here are in the Gulf. Important to us are the elegant terns that we see around here, and then the Heermann's gulls. If you've never seen a Heermann's gull, here's what they look like. You probably have seen them. They're the gray gulls with the white head and the red beak that are found up here that are common over at Lover's Point, and they will go and attack you for your sandwich very readily. They 90% of them nest on one island in the Gulf called Isla Raza. And then there's a few expat populations. And something that you should know if you're ever driving to Monterey to go dive right by In-N-Out, there's a little lake, Lake Roberts, and there's an artificial lake. There's an artificial island in that lake. And on that island is where, in the 1990s, was the first ever recorded breeding pair of Heermann's gulls outside of Mexico. So we have local timeshare Heermann's gulls out there. You'll see them on your swims out. I just wanted to point this out. These connections that we have to the Gulf of California. This is where Isla Raza is. It's extremely low to the water island. You can see a few lagoons on the left side. It's white from all the bird guano. This stuff was harvested back in the day for fertilizer and for weapons, ammunition. Um, it yeah, the bird guano craze of the 1800s was really wild. Actually, part of the reason that Hawaii became a U.S. state was that it was annexed under the Guano Islands Act originally by the United States. So leaving all that politics behind, there's Roberts Lake, there's good old Monterey Bay, there's In-N-Out and Costco and Home Depot, and right there on that teeny tiny little island is where one of the few other oh, I clicked away too early, where one of the only Heermann's gulls are. Those are the types of things that mean nothing to underwater photography generally, but I just thought it was kind of fun that like I'm 1,000 miles up from home on this island, and then all these guests are freaking out over this gull that is just like right next door and that lives over here. Anyway, I guess I'm a Heermann's gull. I like In-N-Out in Monterey too, and like to go to the Gulf. I guess that's the point. Here's what it looks like underwater in the midriffs. Urchins, yes. Tunicate, sponge, or sorry, sponge there in the front, yes. But also porgy, California sheephead, different types of algae. The nudibranchs there, reminiscent of tropical nudibranchs. Here is a tiger tamja. Um, and these things eat other nudibranchs out there. Here's a photo from San Pedro Martir with a Mexican horn shark on top of a sponge with Padina and Cystocyra and like various different types of kelps in the background. The water here was fairly warm that day, but it can be about 50 something degrees. Here's my friend Adrian with a banded guitarfish, similar to the shovel-nosed guitarfishes we have out here. Sea lions in the background. It's a very sharky area, lots of productivity. Um, Speaking of productivity, here's some of that algae, some of the sea lions in the background, and this was really just a photo of those mysid shrimp. They look like little krill, but that's the food for the whales, for the fishes, for so many things out there. These algae beds melt away later in the year, but they're absolutely beautiful during the springtime when the water is very cold. These are they're called podina, uh, sort of calcareous brown algae there forming these cups. This will melt away later on in the year. Um, and reveal more bare rock for more tropical organisms. Lots of endemics in the midrifts. Here's a really fun one. This is a hermit crab that lives inside a species of hydrocoral that only lives on top of these crabs. So it's a symbiotic relationship between a crab and then these horns called the staghorn uh, hydrocoral and the staghorn hermit crab, and these are only found in the midriff islands or in the Gulf, largely around the midriff islands. This one, it looked like a little Viking helmet, but they can kind of have very different shapes for their little hydrocoral shells, and the crab lives inside of there quite comfortably. So this was a very fun one with a living, stinging apartment building hat on its back. More of that kelp up in the midriffs at Isla Ángel de la Guarda. And then here is one of our favorite Heliaster sun stars from the intertidal, the second most abundant animal that John Steinbeck and Ed Ricketts counted in their log from the Sea of Cortez. And it was really fun to do this split shot with that Heliaster and in the background, the actual Western Flyer reborn, rebuilt, put back together by the shipwrights in Port Townsend and sailing back into the Gulf of California. And I was the photographer on board for the first leg up into the Gulf, leaving La Paz. And I was living on board for 10 days, an amazing journey, a really great time. Here's me doing some light painting while we were at anchor at night. That's the logo of the Western Flyer that I tried to do, the WF there, with Western Flyer in the background. I got to be the first underwater photographer with the Western Flyer in the Gulf because they famously didn't even bring a single photographer back then. So no images or videos survive really from the expedition. So I really wanted to provide as much coverage as I could. This is a Pelagia mauve stinger jellyfish underwater, an undescribed species from the Gulf. And then one of my favorite photos from the trip was the Western Flyer lit up by bioluminescent wake. There's many passages in the log from the Sea of Cortez, especially about how it's advisable to look from the tide pool to the stars and back to the tide pool again as a sort of a life philosophy for the science of the West Coast. And right before that, they talk about plankton, a shining phosphorescence in the ocean. And I got to take that photo of the bioluminescence there with the Western Flyer. But I'm looking at my time. I want to make sure that I cover what you were told that you would see. This here is me in Antarctica. So very different. This water, 29 degrees, around 30 degrees. Most of the time, the water colder than freezing because it's so salty. So I got to have my first guided times down there in December and February of last year and this year. Obviously, the ice is incredible. The ice world of Antarctica is unlike any other. There's the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, and then there's the cryosphere as far as like living places on the planet that are so completely different. Um, so I took a lot of split shots of little bergs and things that felt safe to be next to with the ship in the background. But here's one of my favorite photos from the trip of a whole bunch of Gentoo penguins right off the beach with the ship in the background. This was a split shot in the water, standing up to my waist in my dry suit, just waiting for the penguins to come by me. You can see all those little bubbles emanating from the back of them. That's insulation coming out of their feathers as they fly. Here's another split shot. This is right as a wave is breaking over my dome, and in the background are these little penguins. These penguins are they're like 2.5 feet, 3 feet long. They're not very big uh, compared to what you might expect. So they can fit in very thin water. I mean, up to your knees, basically, of water, and a penguin can swim right by you. So this is very shallow to have the penguins there. Deeper, not shallow, down over 80 feet, I think this is 90 feet, are some of the sponges. Antarctica feels sort of like a prehistoric reef scene because it's so dominated by sponges and weirdo organisms, corals and sea stars and things. So there's a lot of algae floating around. You might see some salps next to my dive buddy in the background. But this is about 100 feet deep in Antarctica, quite typical. You might recognize the puffball sponges on the lower left with some candelabra, uh, soft corals, starfish, big tunicates, shrimps, worms, um, bryozoans. Yeah, lots of different styles of life in Antarctica. But if I didn't tell you this was Antarctica, this could be somewhere off the West Coast, somewhere deep. So, cold water ends up ramming with itself, which is really awesome. I didn't know that when I learned how to scuba dive in Monterey Bay, that I could go to Antarctica or any of these cold water places and have a general recognition of who's there. Because I guess there's only so many types of organism that will enjoy the hyper cold. And so here in the coldest ocean on the planet, uh, you end up having very similar animals, big tunicates, big sponges, big anemones. So dive the breakwater wall here in Monterey and ignore the algae, and you might find a friend in Antarctica. One of the weird animals in Antarctica, though, are these massive, it's hard to tell, but this is a uh, 4 foot long worm. This is a ribbon worm. We have them out here in the sand, typically, or under rocks in the intertidal. And ribbon worms are predators. So this thing prowls the reef and will eat just about anything. There are many, many of these out there. So this is actually a very, whoa, hyper predator moment down there. This is what a wall in Antarctica typically looks like. You've got algae just pouring down from the surface. Some of these lasagna kelps on the left, it's not a true kelp, but the lasagna kelps on the left, they've got blades that are 3 feet across, and that can be 80 feet long, pouring down the rock wall. And this is stuff that's adapted to living in low light and then boosting and growing very quickly when the ice melts away, when the sea ice is gone. Um, yeah, this was a really cool dive at Orne Harbor. There's over 900 species of amphipod, so they are everywhere, little sea bugs. They cover everything. So if you are looking at kelp, there's, or on the seaweeds, there's dozens of these different species there. Here is a giant isopod, an Antarctic giant isopod. You may know the Atlantic giant isopod that grows massive, and that actually they're at the touch pool of the aquarium right now in the deep sea exhibit. This is a Antarctic component. Very, very fun, really alien, really crazy. One of the wildest animals down in Antarctica, though, is the Death Star. Um, yeah, these things will eat just about anything. They're just like our sunflower, local sunflower sea star. Um, in that they devour anything. But the thing is that on their back they have a bajillion pinchers called pedicellariae. All those little bumps and so on, those are little jaws that they use to grab their food. Um, Out of the water column or anything that lands on their back. And so one particular victim of this starfish was this amphipod right here, you might see now, that got grabbed by those pinchers, and it's going to eventually be consumed by the starfish. But what they'll also do is they'll stick their leg up, or their legs, many of them, up into the water column. So here's one angle of this particular animal, and then here's the reverse angle where it just has its arm up in the water column and it's waiting for krill or mysid shrimp or something to swim by, and then they'll snag the food out of the water. So they'll go fishing with their arms up. And you can see this one here. It's got its sensory tube feet out in the front and a little eyeball trying to figure out what's going on. So Really, really alien animal. Really cool stuff. This is one of my favorite animals from the whole trip, a teeny tiny jellyfish that lives attached to the kelp. It's called Starocladia charcoti. And Charcot, Commandant Charcot, is a French legendary explorer of the Antarctic. The reason you probably haven't heard of Commandant Charcot is because he was successful. Nothing ever went wrong. They got all their science done. They didn't lose a man. They didn't lose a ship. And they came back with all the science that they wanted to. You've heard of Shackleton probably because he failed at everything he attempted to do except save his men. That's one way that people will interpret Shackleton is that he never accomplished what he actually tried to do, but he did survive really harrowing circumstances. So, anyway, named for Commandant Charcot. If you don't know him, look him up. He's awesome. Um, Nudibranchs. There's lots of nudibranchs down in Antarctica. I do a calendar every year called Tasteful Nudes. If you don't have yours yet, you can sign up on my Patreon, Underwater Pat on Patreon. You can subscribe and get a free calendar out of it, or you can buy it online if you want. If this year, I believe it's going to be Tasteful Nudes, Rhinophornography is going to be the name. If you don't know the rhinophores, those are the little ears on them that help them smell. This is a Doris kerguelensis. There's apparently several dozen species that come out of this one species. So it's a species complex, but this is very similar to the Doris odneri that we have out here in Monterey. So you might be confused, if you didn't know this was Antarctica, this could be around here. Same thing with this. This is Aegirus genus, and we have salt and pepper Dorises out here. Same genus, almost identical. So again, a lot of familiarity with animals around here. We have in Antarctica, though, these really cool sea angels. These are a couple inches long. And they flap around slowly in the water column, ready to grab little sea snails that are floating by them. Some of my favorite animals to dive with are the sea angels. They're some of my favorite in Greenland. The salps, extremely common. These are a filter feeding animal that are very abundant in the Southern Ocean. They're basically the counterpart to krill. These are in our same phylum. Salps are chordates. They just don't have a backbone when they're adults. So the joke I always tell on the ships is that these animals, when they're young, they have the beginnings of a spinal cord that they lose in adulthood, very much like state senators. Everybody starts laughing. It's raucous applause. It wakes everybody up if they were asleep. So salps are a really common animal there. Limpets, one of the most common, Antarctic limpets are one of the most common animals down in the Southern Ocean. Several different ways of lighting them to make them a little bit more impressive. And then this one was one of my favorites. This was my first photo I took of the limpets. And a fun moment, we talked about light composition moment. A really fun moment is if you ever see Antarctic limpets stacked on top of themselves, it's because they are potentially spawning. And I happen to take this photo of some limpets spawning. There's a female up there releasing her eggs, the little white and yellow orbs. And then this male down here is releasing sperm, and the sperm and the eggs mix in these towers of power and then become the next generation of limpet. So, talking about photo tricks, these are some photos I took last week of some of these tube snout eggs that are happening on the kelp, just as far as light. Here you got the black background, a snoot light landing in the middle to help illuminate these lids.
Hey, Pat.
Pockets of eggs on the kelp. So it could be a very static image, but trying to give it a little bit of
Pat.
then the composition, moving my camera around, trying to find different angles. I happened to find this one where the kelp was hanging a little bit lower from the weight of the eggs. And so you could kind of get down and get some foreground blur, very shallow depth of field to get that first little bit of eggs in relief and then have it fade out into the background with a nice line that you can follow from the right to the middle and down with the lines of the kelp. So um, this took a little bit of time to try to find. It took many failed photos, and this one happened to be the one that I migrated to. If you saw the all the photos that I took, maybe there'd be one that you liked more over another, but I ended up liking this composition, very different than the just side on. And then the moment I was waiting for this one, it's still not my favorite version of this. I've seen it done by other photographers like Sage Ono and Kate Violet and such, but it's nice to have the parent in the picture. And so this was the one where the fish came over and was, so that's the tube snout. And then those are its eggs that are on the kelp there. Um, yeah, so this would be an example of a moment where this was the only time that the parent was in view. So if I was trying to tell the story to the guests, I would be able to show this fish and then it has these eggs and then go into, and then here they are developing and be able to show a little bit of a story picture by going from like wide and the environments and kelp, and then the idea that kelp is a nursery for for fish might not be obvious, but then if you have sticky egg clusters that are laid on the kelp, then now the kelp is a an incubation chamber and not just a pretty alga or something getting caught in your zodiac prop. And then here I just wanted, I guess, the point of that animation. So you can see here that there's minimal backscatter. You can see the backscatter, but it's not very prominent. And then here you can see that this was the original image with all the backscatter in there. If you have not purchased the backscatter eliminator tool, I have it because it cuts down my work uh, in half if I'm on a ship and I only have 30 minutes to edit a photo. If I can just knock out the backscatter so that it's not distracting for an educational moment, I'll do that. One of the things though is I don't like the perfectly clean backscatter photos much anymore. It feels a little bit too artificial because it's just nice to have some component of the water is dirty. Like when you see people that are diving in green water and they turn it blue, it's like, no, you were diving in green water. Why are you trying to make the water blue? This whole film production with whale fall, they're like, how come the magentas and everything are all off? I'm like, because you're trying to make green water blue. So I don't like it like, yeah, it was perfectly clear. There was zero backscatter. So what you can do, and what I did in this particular image, is that you can run the backscatter eliminator tool on this, and then the layer in there that it creates that has masked all of it out, you can lower the opacity of that layer alone until it's barely there, but kind of there, and then it'll make the backscatter just less bothersome. It doesn't take it out, it just smooths the backscatter out. And I've really liked that as far as a like compositional tool.
Hey, Peter, on this picture that you have up right now, it looks, or Patrick, I'm sorry, it looks like you layered one photo over another.
That's the motion blur.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, no, good observation. That's the motion blur from a slower shutter speed enough to get the background and then with a pop at the end. I tend to veer towards slight motion blur. It would have been nice to have everything perfectly stopped, but no, that's from the blur.
I think she's talking about something else. I mean, it looks like there's a picture that's only 70 or 80% of the width that you
Oh, yeah,
super,
sorry. No,
yeah,
that yeah, sorry, that's in my keynote. So this is the photo zoomed in to fill full screen, and then here I'm just showing the full 3 by 2 instead of 16 by
mhm,
9, the three
yeah,
by 2 image, and you can see more of the image, but just with the backscatter there. That was
right.
just in my keynote.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Now I've taken up a lot of your time. Hopefully you will be able to hear this next video that I play. Um, but I like to make my videos for the Monterey Shootout. I was asked to talk a little bit about how I make those videos or like your storytelling. Basically, if you're not in the habit of telling stories to people and you want to tell stories, start telling people stories. Write stuff down, find an audience, if it's an open mic, if it's your friends, if it's a phone call, if it's writing something out on a blog, if it's any form of media where you have to take your ideas out of your head, distill them down into something and share them with another audience, and then the audience needs to feel a certain something by the end, not just like a pamphlet posted on a wall, but like you want somebody to feel something. Just practice that in some way, and you'll start to notice where certain themes or jokes or premises kind of stick with you, and write those down. If you are thinking about a story and you have a particular premise or a fun little line or a interesting conclusion or a truth or a revelation that you're like, oh, that's an interesting thing. I have this storyboard forming in my head. Write that stuff down because not only will you forget it, but also the inspiration that you had when you first write it down might be able to carry you into fleshing out a full idea. So generally for the shootout, it used to be 1 minute, then it was 2 minute video categories, and I'd have this premise, and I would try to create some form of a story where it doesn't matter what I see during the shootout. I can just fill in the whatever I film, whatever's good, I can just slot that into the video edit. And I basically have a story that has a very obvious beginning, middle, end with a revelation or a reveal of some kind. I tend to be somebody who uh, likes to um, be very, or like be meta about what it is that I'm doing. So I like to make commentary about the shootout itself or about the feelings that the shootout engenders in you or what it's like to be an underwater photographer and have to rely on Instagram, or what it's like to be an underwater photographer and no longer have a buddy. Just it's fun to be meta for me to think critically about how silly it is what we're doing and then work backward from there. So I like to call that so there's this next little bit here. This would be like the idea. There's a premise, there's tension, and then there's release, basically in a story. So you want to have a premise, some general theme, the moral, if you will, that kind of drives the narrative. Then there's tension where you have a beginning and you have something that's going on that rises there's something at stake in the video. And then there's a moment in the story, and then there's a moment of newness. Once you break through the tension snaps, and then you have this release, and then that's the feeling of either happiness, joy, silliness. So that's my three parts. So if we have light composition moment, then premise, tension, and release would be the other ones for like for me, the stories that I tend to enjoy. So I'm going to take a little bit of time, but I wanted to play this particular video that I think.
All right, let's just get that rhinophore focus and nailed it. Sorry that took 2 hours, buddy. We can go ahead and, buddy, nah, I'm hungry. Buddy, I'm pretty. Buddy, I'm a nudie. Wait, where's my buddy? Buddy, buddy. Hey, buddy. Excuse me, have you seen my buddy? Sorry. Kids these days. Buddy. Buddy? Oh yeah, we could use a third. Later. Hey, wanna be buddies? Already got a flatmate. Cheers though. Perdóname, pero ¿dónde está my buddy? No sé. Yo no sé también. Lo siento. No sé. Gracias, amigos. Y bienvenidos. Hey, nice C haircut. Terrible pun. Go away. Oh. Buddy. Oh, there's my buddy.
Could you give me a thumbs up if you could all hear that? You heard the video in there. Okay. So that's a video that I had in my mind of like if you're an underwater photographer, you don't have a buddy, or you don't have a good buddy, or you're the terrible buddy. And so it didn't really matter what happened during the shootout. I could just slot in what was there, and then I just try to react to it. So the pelagic red crabs were in that year, and they're all coming in from Mexico with the El Nino. And so the fact that they speak Spanish is just funny to me. Then all these little puns and stuff. I didn't film a lot of those things particularly well. They just were characters in the story to like get through. So anyway, I had storyboarded the parts where I'm filming myself. I knew I had to do a few different these and so on. But so the premise is one that at the shootout, everybody's gonna be like, oh yeah, that's kind of funny. Where's my buddy? Anyway. So then tension, I think this one is one where like there's usually a moment where I feel tension or discomfort around the very nature of what we're doing as underwater photographers or like something that means something to me. Um, like what are we doing? Why are we doing? And then why do I feel so stressed or bent out of shape, sad about a photo or a video that I've made when half the time when somebody shares me with me a photo that's not quote good underwater, but it's of underwater stuff, I get excited. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Whoa, where was that? You know? So then I get in my own head of like, this isn't artistic or self-expression or a masterpiece or anything. So why even share it? So then that tension is like, oh, well, I should explore that in a little video. And so here's like one of those moments of like the tension of being the Instagram photographer.
It's cold. Why do you go diving? Oh, that's easy.
Go ahead, Mac.
Instagram.
Huh? You even.
Up, ladies.
Hi, Mr. Pat.
What do you think of this photo?
It's okay.
No.
So I don't know. You've probably seen that before, but anyway, like just the idea of like what are we doing it for? The likes, the recognition, and then somebody is just like, yeah, okay, that's fine. You know, the idea that photography should stay about self-expression and personal and like it the accolades are nice, but if you do it for that, you'll get disappointed and disillusioned. So filming the selfies with me, the music choice was very hipster, very like not typical music that I would do. The editing with the like zoom twists and punch zooms and like all that stuff, that was just like tropes that everybody was doing on Instagram where everybody ends up looking exactly the same, even though they're like, oh, wow, I'm out there. So it was a pastiche, a little like little yeah, satire, I guess you will, of and making fun of myself. So then like
There
resolution,
wasn't any music.
what was that?
There wasn't any music.
Oh, there wasn't any music.
Yeah,
Oh
that
no.
didn't come across at all in the video.
Oh, dang. All right. Well, you missed out on probably a good two-thirds of the effect. Anyway, sorry, Zoom. Um, did you have music on the first one? You could hear me on the first one?
No, I mean, we could hear everything, but not the music. The music didn't come through on the
We
first
might
one.
have to change my audio settings in here,
Yeah.
maybe.
Okay.
Music
We
worked
can hear
for
you talk. Yeah,
Hmm?
the first one.
Huh. Okay. Well, I feel less confident about playing this next one. But this is the one from the last shootout. It doesn't rely on the music so much, but this is an idea of a video with a, a premise, some tension and resolution, um, where by the end there's the the intent is for the viewer to understand the motivation of the person in the video. So when you're crafting a short story or a short something, sometimes I mean, the shootout is what it is. Sometimes it's just the beautiful video montage and the music, and it's just the quality of the footage that really takes it away. But as far as the storytelling, having a very having a character that goes through an arc is something that we all like enjoy watching in TV shows and movies and so on. And so having a state at the start of the story and a state at the end of the story is something to look for. So like there's often TV shows that or skits, for example, on SNL that don't know when to end. And because the premise is strong and the tension is strong, and the release, or in this case, I guess I said resolution, the resolution never comes because it's such a silly idea, or the joke has been made, but it's such a short joke that people stretch it and then it kind of ends abruptly. There's many movies like that that have these sort of false endings, or moments where like it would have been nice to have cut over here instead of over here. And so this is one where it was circular in my mind when I wrote it. And so you can kind of go back to the start. And this is a general premise of like why I go diving and take these videos and what you can get out of it. Anyway, I don't know if you could hear the music there. If not, all good. It just goes through the question, answer, question. Why do you go diving? What's the point? You see all these things, you ask these questions, you show it to people, they get excited, they ask questions, you go out try to find the next thing.
Was
Sort of,
that also a Monterey Shootout thing?
yeah, yeah. So
What year was that?
that was last year.
Oh, cool. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
yeah. So yeah, it's funny seeing that cove today because I was in that water for 6 hours today, being thrown around in the surf. Yeah, so I guess that's my time. A little bit over, but hopefully those photos and videos gave you a bit of an idea of my process, some tips, tricks, things to think about. Light composition moment are things that I start to think about more now, as far as like why I might like an image or what I might need to do to make an image better, or if I'm in that moment, what do I need to be thinking about, or if the light is nice, what do I need to be looking for? Uh, and then in terms of video, having a premise to your story, having a tension that builds, and then having some resolution to that tension that feels satisfying. If you add any component to a story that you have where maybe it falls flat, you know that the premise is good, or you know that there's a funny resolution, or there's like this feels like a tense thing. And tension doesn't have to be bad. It can just be like this like, what happens when they go over this rock or dive into this area. Um, those are the things that I have in my mind as far as when I'm trying to tell people stories, where I'm trying to bring them to. And it's nice to just bring them there via some avenue that feels true to you and not just what everyone else is doing. There's a photo of me on board the Western Flyer with Ed Ricketts. Ed Ricketts is one of my marine biology heroes and inspirations. He was written about extensively in Cannery Row, Log from the Sea of Cortez. Him and Steinbeck and Carol Steinbeck write a bunch of really amazing stuff that becomes sort of the philosophical underpinnings of marine science on the West Coast. The people who trained me in marine science were really students of Ed Ricketts. And one of the things he talks about is that the nature of what things are is a very important thing. How and what instead of why questions are very interesting. So instead of trying to figure out why we do this or why is this important or um, just how am I doing this? What am I doing? Actually, the premise of the log frequency of Cortez is knowing what you're doing is very important. So if you're making photos, if you're telling stories, trying to go back to like, how am I trying to tell this story and what am I actually trying to say? What am I actually trying to produce? That is often not very easy to identify as like, what am I doing with my camera in this kelp forest? Sometimes that's a grounding question. Why we're there, fun, acclaim, prizes, awards, community, friendships, those things all come through. But sometimes it's just what am I doing? And then that will help you find the photo. I see Rose has a hand up.
Hey, I had a question about the Gentoo penguin wave picture.
Yeah.
Um, what lens were you using for that? I don't see any warping in the sand. It looks so nice.
The one with all the penguins under the water looking straight back at the ship was taken on the fisheye with a the Super 35 crop that you can do in on Sony cameras. So it's punched in and it cuts out some of that warp and distortion. And then it is cropped in just a little bit from that. But the photo sensor cuts in from the full so that you don't get the warp effect. So if you have the fisheye and you don't want to go for like the full fisheye effect, you can crop
Are you
in.
saying it makes it look like a fisheye look like a rectilinear?
It approximates it, yeah,
Okay.
by only looking in the middle of the sensor instead of the full sensor. In the full
Yeah.
sensor, the corners are going to be warped and everything's going to be pretty wild. But then in the crop sensor, it kind of moves into the middle, and then from there, it crops in a little bit more. It cuts
And
down on
does it get
your
rid of the barrel distortion as well?
uh, yeah, in video more than in photo. In photo, you can still
Okay.
kind of.
Okay.
So, what's the sense in doing that in camera versus just doing that in post, just cropping in post?
To me, it helped the framing
Ah,
uh, to do it that way.
case
And
with the one with the wave crashing over the shallows.
the one with the wave crashing over, that's full fisheye.
Oh, okay, wow.
Yeah. It's what makes the penguin on the right look big, is the warp from the fisheye.
And are you shooting the same camera for stills and for video?
Yeah, that was my investment into this camera body. The background here, right here in front of me. There's the macro lens on it right now, but then this little camera here can shoot 4K, 120 frames per second, um, with a pretty deep color field, which helps me a lot with my Limblad work because 120 frames per second means that if you only get 1 second of usable footage, it's actually 4 seconds of usable footage. But because it's 4K, it means that on a 1080p screen, so typically what you have on YouTube or on phones and stuff, anything above 1080, you can't really tell the quality, or most of the time it plays back at a lower quality than 4K. But 4K is twice as big as 1080. So then it means that you can punch in and crop in to your 4K video and still have full resolution at 1080, and then you can move the 4K file around that little 1080p portion so you can do fake pans, crops, zooms. So 1 second at 120 4K could actually end up being 8 different shots if you wanted it to be slowed down, punched in, zoomed out, faded, panned. So it gives you a lot of leeway in the edit if, for example, I'm in Antarctica, my fingers are freezing, and I hit record on something and I get a second of it, and then my finger twitches and I turn it off, and I don't realize that I've turned off the camera because I'm so cold. And then I get home and I'm like, I only had a second of that, but then you can stretch it. So it can save your edit. And then also 4K 120 on a big screen is really satisfying, slowed down 4 times. Um, and then yeah, it's a 50 megapixel camera itself, and so it is really good for photography, especially in macro, being able to zoom in on photos. I really like doing presentations on the ship where I'm taking photos of stuff, um, and then I notice a little shrimp or a feature of an animal, and then I can zoom in and really show off that detail. I did a few of those in this keynote. And people really get blown away by just the detail of like a starfish back, or there was some weird thing in the background, and like, oh, here's this worm, and then we can talk about the worm for a little bit. So it's a
So what
really
kind of camera was that again?
a
Was it a
Sony,
A7 or a Alpha 1 or?
yeah, the Sony Alpha 1.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. The day that I outgrow that camera's capabilities, I need to start thinking of retirement or something because I have
Yeah,
barely
right.
scratched the surface. Yes,
So are
Rob.
you a full
Sorry,
pro
Robert.
now in terms of video and photography? I mean, is that like how you make all of your living or?
Yeah, so I don't make a great living currently with the state of the world. It's hard to um yeah, the credit cards are floating a lot of the having the bottom fall out of print media while I'm trying to get into this is pretty
Yeah,
fun. So Nat Geo doesn't really have its editorial staff or writer staff there anymore. You pitch stories and everything, and there's not a huge monetary support of the arts right now. So doing this
yeah,
guiding work, I'd say 90% of my job is not doing underwater photography,
yeah.
but the 10% of it that it is the stuff that's the most rewarding and that people then know me for. But most, as far as my profession, but then most of my job is really driving zodiacs, leading hikes, um, doing presentations.
Like doing guided tours.
Exactly.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
So the majority of underwater photographers that I know that are trying to do it full time have separate jobs. For example, Kate Violet, big time photographer in the area, she has a photo studio that she runs. A lot of videographers in the area, they film weddings and do all of that stuff. I do consultation in social media and some writing and stuff here and there. So
Yeah,
full-time photography in underwater photography is just not feasible, and I'm kind of just squeaking by right now
right.
um, with it. But I
And
would
can you say
rather,
more about the project you said you were working on today? Is it a film that they're shooting at Monastery or?
yeah, it's a Hollywood Disney movie coming out next year that's based on the book Whale Fall. So
Okay,
we just wrapped all of the ocean filming component today in at Monastery.
okay, cool.
Yeah, it should be fun. It's the premise is pretty wild. You should read the book, but basically
Okay,
this young kid goes out searching for the ghost of his dad,
yeah.
of his past, and then on this dive sees a giant squid on the Monastery Canyon, and then a sperm whale eats the giant squid, also swallows the diver, and then he has to make his way out of the whale.
Wow.
So it's one of those movies where it's not exactly accurate, but if you can just suspend your disbelief for a second.
So it's not a document. It's not based on a documentary, right?
No, it's not a documentary, but it is going to have photos of local divers on the wall of the dive shop, and
Yeah.
it's going to be as accurate as it can be until it gets outlandish.
Okay.
Rose, you had your hand up.
Yeah. God, it does feel good to commiserate with you a little bit, in terms of having to have that second job to support a little bit more this year than the last few years. But I wanted to ask what I'm looking for new lenses, so I'm wondering what lenses are in your kit right now, and which ones you gravitate towards the most.
Yeah, good question. So right now with my work with Lindblad, because we never really know what we're going to see on particular dive sites and in particular areas in Antarctica or Greenland and other places where there's a lot of ice. Um, there's a lot of scouring in places, and there's areas where the life is just yeah, it's just very hit and miss. So I have a wet lens setup for the Sony A1. Let me see here if I can just see about my background. Let me just turn off the background. Hello, you're in my office. So um, this is probably the main setup. This is the main setup that I use for Lindblad is this camera, the Sony A1. That's the macro lens. I really like this for obviously nudibranch photography and everything. But when I'm working, the macro lens is a bit of a liability because if I see something bigger, then I can't really take the photo. So what I do on my Lindblad dives where I have to be able to cover macro and wide on the same dive in photo and video if I can, is I use the kit lens, which is the 28 to 60. I keep calling it a 22 to 70, but it's a 28 to 60. And then this thing on that camera goes in with the WWLB situation. So that port on that flat lens ends up, so it's just this amount of lens with that tiny one. But then this thing is the wet lens. If you're not familiar with wet lenses, they're awesome. But this thing is the lens that then takes in the light from the water. And with just a little bit of water in the background here on this flat port, this ends up being a 130-degree field of view that you can zoom through. That's how I did that bull kelp photo. This is a big buoyancy collar, so don't get too distracted by that. But that's the actual physical lens. You don't want to scratch that. You'll be very sad. And this is what I'm doing most of my video. It's rectilinear, so it doesn't have the same warping of the fisheye. You can zoom through. It focuses right on the front. And so for photography, it's also great because this is the sharpest, one of the sharpest lens combos out there is the kit lens, which is like 200 bucks. And then this thing, which is about $1,000 for the WWLB. So I use that, and then you can take this off, and then on a bayonet system, then I have this mounted on my housing between my two arms. I have this mounted there, and then I can just take this, slap it on, and now it's hanging out on my housing. And then I put on the front of this the macro diopter that's on my other macro setup. So then I can take those on and off interchangeably underwater. And then you can do limited macro. It's not as good as having a full macro lens, but you can do decent macro video, decent macro photo, decent wide angle, all on the same dive. And that's what allows us to provide the most coverage for the guests. So that has been the primary setup But I am a big fan of fisheye photography. So between macro with the diopter and a snoot, fisheye photography, close focus, wide angle, and then these rectilinear situations, that's kind of the top three. When I first started, I was doing a Panasonic GH4 and then a GH5, which is a micro four thirds sensor. And I had a prime fisheye that was super sharp, and it's sharper than some of the images I take with this camera with the 8 to 15. And then I had a 60 millimeter macro, which on the GH4 with the crop sensor was actually a 120. And so uh, the super macro of the GH5 was insane. So I've actually had to adjust my expectations of what the full frame camera can do because it can't quite get as close as some of the photos that I used to take on the crop sensor. But overall, the quality is much higher and better. But so that answers your question. I have the wet lens dual for the work, and then on my own time, I go between macro and fisheye typically.
So that kit lens, that's what you're using for the close focus wide angle as well. That works well.
Close focus wide angle will be on the fisheye, on the rectilinear wide. Uh, yeah, on the wet lens, I'll fake some of the fisheye effect by having a very shallow depth of field, so like f4.5 focused on the front of the lens element will then make it seem like you're doing like one of those EMWL, like those crazy things that, you know, extend out this way and create close focus wide angle macro images. The actual EMWL and like those things are like $7,000. If any of you have one lying around, I'd appreciate it, but like I'm not getting one of those anytime soon. So you can fake or not fake, you can do the effect with certain settings with those cameras.
I'd also like to throw my name in if someone has an EMWL lying around.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do. I love the kit lens setup. You pretty much described exactly the kit I have. I just don't have the fisheye yet, and I think you've just convinced me to bite the bullet and finally go for it.
I've really enjoyed fisheye photography, even topside. Um, Here's an example of the circular fisheye that you can do. This is in Bahia de los Angeles. And those are bujum trees, which are named for a Lewis Carroll uh, poem. They're really bizarro organisms, but with the 8 to 15 fisheye, you can go to 8 and then it becomes circular fisheye, and then there's sort of this internal glare that you can get. And so this was one of my favorite photos I took from the trip, and I brought the fisheye for underwater, but it ends up being a lens that most photographers don't think to take with them into a cactus field, and it ends up being super fun to play around with. So I highly recommend fisheye.
That flare is great.
Yeah, looking straight into the sun. Tim, you've had your hand up. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, I was just going to mention I may have told you before I did a presentation a few years ago to a photography class on underwater photography, and in there I made use of your "Where's My Buddy" video clip,
Oh,
and I
cool.
got a big kick out of that. So I just want to say thanks for that.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, that's probably the one that if you've seen a video of mine, it was probably that one. That was a fun one. That was one that I wrote probably several years prior to actually filming it for the shootout. I just thought it was funny that I no longer had any buddies. And now that I'm a diver in these remote places, often it's weird that sometimes my diver is somebody who doesn't have a camera and they're just there to watch me. It's weird to like feel watched the whole time. I'm like, wait, I didn't actually need a buddy, I think. I mean, it's nice. Thanks for being there. But yeah, anyway.
Hey, I've read the logbook Sea Tales like 3 times. I really like it. So I've been following the boat to some degree and what's happening there, and also a little bit from Ray Troll has talked about it some as well. He's been involved, but the I'd be curious to see the rest of the photos you took on that boat. Are you going to present those at some point to since
Yeah,
you could do like a natural history museum kind of presentation or sort of a large.
yeah. No, it's a great yeah, so actually the 19th of this month there's a special event at the Pacific Grove Museum of Natural History that is a Steinbeck and Ricketts night. And so I'm preparing a slideshow of the images that I took on the flyer to be presented there on a loop. So
Well, it's coincidence. That sounds like a great idea. So
Did you pay Brad for a plug?
yeah, yeah. No, yeah, I've been trying to pitch a story from the trip to some publications with some of the photos. So they're edited now. The Western Flyer Foundation has them. Um, and yeah, the first thing that we're gonna do is this event in Pacific Grove. But the Steinbeck Museum, Steinbeck Center, sorry, in Salinas is wanting to do a thing on the Western Flyer, and so we'll probably work with them with photos in the exhibit. And yeah, at some point, I think it'll be a more public thing. But yeah, it was really amazing to be on the ship and be able to take photos of it in Mexico because those were the first photos of it in Mexico that had been taken.
yeah, really jealous. That would be fantastic. Hopefully I can make it down there. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it was an all volunteer gig, so it's really beautiful, really amazing to be a part of, and a lot of people on there just in it for the love. So the boat will be around for several years, and I've pitched them the idea that they should have visiting photographers, storytellers, writers, artists, like people who just take part on some of these expeditions and then have the opportunity to photograph, sort of with the presumption that they would then make those photos available to the flyer, but then have that opportunity. And I think the flyer is still a very young nonprofit, and so they're trying to figure themselves out. But I think the artist in residence program is something that they've been wanting to do. They just haven't even had time to figure out where the next port of call is on various trips. So if you give it a little bit of time, but kind of stay around, it's in Moss Landing and it'll be parked off of the wharf. And Sherry Flemmerfelt, the CEO, she's always just looking for anybody interested in helping. And so photos, stories, blog posts, anything like that. So the ship is back and it should be considered to be an open platform, is my feeling with it. I talked to the CEO a few times and I'm like, this boat needs to feel like anybody who loves it should be able to be involved in some part of it. And over its lifetime, that will hopefully be more and more the case. Because right now it doesn't know if it wants to be a research vessel, an educational vessel, an artist thing, a traveling this, like it could be so many things. It's trying to figure it out. But yeah, stay abreast of them and then get involved where you can. I got involved with the Western Flyer by throwing a pizza party for them like 4 years ago or something for the Western Flyer. So that's how that snowballed.
All right. Well, I'll look into it. Thanks.
Cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Are there
Okay.
any other questions for Patrick? All right. Well, Patrick, let me thank you for
That was an excellent presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Helga. Thanks, everybody, for asking questions. Brad, good to see
Yeah.
you.
We'll see what the shootout, but it's nice not to have the competition this year. So